teaching the world how to restore health and vitality, Dr. Terry Wahls is up next. Hi, Dr. Terry Wahls. Welcome to the call. How are you?
Excellent. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. And so just to provide a little bit of context for the listeners that don't know who you are or your story or your journey, take some time and just share with us your story and the
Sure.
amazing journey that you've been through.
So I am a professor of medicine at the University of Iowa, and certainly a conventional internal medicine physician. In 2000, I developed some weakness in my left leg, started stumbling, and was evaluated, found to have lesions in my spinal cord and abnormal spinal fluid. My neurologist said, 13 years earlier, you'd had an episode of dim vision in your left eye.
Wow.
And so this was all probably due to relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. Being a physician and having two very young kids, ages 8 and 5, I knew I wanted to treat my disease aggressively, so I sought out the best MS center I could find that was doing clinical research, saw their best people, took the newest drugs, but I continued to go downhill. 2 years later, my Cleveland Clinic physicians told me about the work of Lauren Cordain. And so after being a vegetarian for 20 years and following a low saturated fat diet, I went back to eating meat. I took out all grain, all legumes, all dairy. I continued to decline. The next year, they told me I'd converted to secondary progressive multiple sclerosis, and that functions once lost would never come back. So I got the tilt-recline wheelchair. I took the chemotherapy, even though the risks said congestive heart failure and developing cancers, because I was more terrified of the disability. I continued to decline. Then I took Tysabri, that very new potent biologic drug. Again, the risk of worsening infections, but I was more terrified of my disease, so I took the Tysabri. I continued to decline. Then I switched to Cellcept, another very potent disease-modifying drug, and now I had skin ulcers, a lot of bruising, and I continued to decline. Now, at that point, it was clear to me that the best drugs from the best MS center in the country was not stopping my slide towards a bedridden, potentially demented life. I also have trigeminal neuralgia, which are electrical face pains that come on, and we're getting increasingly severe, increasingly frequent, and more difficult to control. I go back to reading the basic science, and I ultimately decide that mitochondria dysfunction is what's driving the disability, and would create a supplement cocktail to support my mitochondria. And the speed of my decline slows, but I'm still declining. Now, by the summer of 2007, I'm so weak I cannot sit up in a regular chair. I have a fancy recliner where my knees are higher than my nose. I have one at work, one at home. I'm having more trouble with fatigue, beginning to have trouble with brain fog, and my pain is getting to be more and more difficult. But it was that summer that I discovered the Institute for Functional Medicine. I take their course in neuroprotection. I have a longer list of supplements, which I add, and not a lot changes. But then what is remarkable is that I have this big aha moment, like what if I redesign my paleo diet based on these, what I was taking in supplement form, that likely, I'd pick up some more key nutrients. And it's really quite remarkable. The pain goes away, the fatigue goes away, the brain fog goes away. I'm beginning to walk again. And within 12 months, I'm able to do an 18.5-mile bike ride.
Wow.
So, this really changes how I think about disease and health. It would change the focus of my research and certainly the way I treat my patients.
No, I love it. And so just a few clarifying questions for the listeners. What is an autoimmune disorder?
Sure. So our immune cells are really responsible for maintaining and repairing our cells. When that function gets out of tune, out of whack, the immune cells can begin attacking cells that are healthy and begin dissolving them, creating damage and scarring as opposed to repairing. In my case with multiple sclerosis, what we think is happening is the immune cells in the brain are attacking the insulation or the wiring between brain cells and causing spotty areas of inflammation, irritation, and then spotty scarring. Then there's also evidence that premature loss of brain cells and spinal cord cells happen as well.
Okay. And then because there are multiple types, just doing like a quick Google search, there would be like rheumatoid arthritis, like lupus,
Yes,
was it
psoriasis,
polymyalgia, and there's so many different types because you just
many
kind of
hundreds.
yeah, and so for someone on the outside of it, you just hear autoimmune and it's kind of like okay, like I know that's a thing because I've heard of it, but I don't
You know,
really know anything about it.
and we should really think of autoimmune issues as a spectrum. So at first, we will have our immune cells not working properly,
Hmm.
and you begin attacking otherwise healthy parts of your body, making what we call autoantibodies. And these are proteins that we can measure that tell us this attack of self is beginning to happen. And if that continues for another few years, you get more extensive damage, and then eventually you can get enough damage you can make discrete diagnoses. But
Hmm.
we're beginning to realize that this immune dysfunction, where immune cells are attacking self, and we don't have the appropriate level of inflammation. We see that even in mental health issues like anxiety, depression, schizophrenia,
Yeah.
obesity, high blood pressure, atherosclerosis or clogging of the arteries.
So it's a lot more common than
It's very common.
okay.
There are probably 25 million people in America that have a specific autoimmune diagnosis, but there's another 50 million that are in the spectrum where they have symptoms, often some fatigue and pain. And if you start doing blood levels for these antibodies against self, you can start measuring antibody levels. So they're in the process of developing an overt autoimmune diagnosis, and that may take another couple of years or maybe even another decade.
It's just a process.
It's right. It's a spectrum.
No, I love it. And then another question is what really is a paleo diet because it sounded like you were already kind of on one, but then once you had that aha moment,
Yeah.
you adjusted it a little. So
So the paleo diet, and Lauren Cordain was one of the early advocates for the paleo diet. And his theory was that when we started eating these grain-based foods that came with agriculture about 8,000 years ago, and steadily increased the amount of grain and starch and sugars, that our health began to decline. And so he advocated trying to eat a diet that took out these more recent foods. And so he recommended eating meats, vegetables. Some versions have grain, some versions have dairy in them. And I have to remind everyone, I really like the paleo diet.
hmm.
However, I started the paleo diet in 2002 as described by Cordain, no grain, no legumes, no dairy. And the next year I needed the wheelchair, and I continued to decline for the next 4 years. It wasn't until I created a much more precise and specified and controlled paleo diet that I designed specifically for my brain that I had this remarkable healing transformation.
And I'm guessing a lot of that had to do with almost really a change in perspective on viewing your body as an ecosystem. I know you did. I've seen a
Yes,
couple of your posts like that. And could you spend some time really just kind of diving into that, explaining that? Because I mean,
sure.
before I saw it on your page, I was like, oh, there's like I kind of had like a mini aha moment. It's like, oh yeah, that I guess that makes sense.
Well, if you sort of think about the evolution of life over the 1.5 billion years that biochemical reactions in life have been happening, random mutations occur, and the mutations that make the environment um, more favorable are more likely to be transmitted to the offspring. And so that happens in the bacterial and the fungi kingdom, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom. And in our ancestral mothers and fathers, as they had their random mutations, are how we run the chemistry of life has gotten more and more properly aligned with our environment.
Hmm.
So that what that really means is that we're getting more and more fine-tuned towards the environment. When our ancestors separated from the primates, we were outside 24/7. We were eating probably 200 plus different plant species in a year. All of our food was organic. We were physically very active. When the sun went down and it was dark, we slept. When the sun came up, we got up.
Yeah.
We lived in small social units. And so, and we had, survived about 6 million years that way. And then as our species evolved about 250,000, 500,000 years ago, again, our environment was very similar to that. When we became farmers, we started changing what we ate. And 300 years ago, we figured out how to make sugar and white flour. We again changed what we ate. And we've steadily increased our sugars, decreased our vegetable intake. And so, looking at the health of humanity, it would appear that these changes have been associated with a much higher rate of high blood pressure, obesity, heart disease, cancers, mental health problems, autoimmune problems. And Cordain's approach was that we should try and live in an environment that is more closely aligned to our ancestral environment.
Hmm.
Where I've taken that is, so we should be thinking about our exercise, our diet, our sleep patterns. We'd want to get our microbiome, that is the microbes living in and on us, for them to have a healthier environment as well. And as many of these factors that we can shift towards a more health promoting state, likely the chemistry of how we run our life will improve.
No, I love it. And so where do you kind of see, say for the parent, right, with the child who's going to listen to this and hear this, and now of course they're going to have 10 million red flags going up on saying, "Oh my gosh, my child can't eat anything. I need to, and like I need to go to a farmer's market.
Well,
Like they can't eat anything at the school." How do you what would you say to
what
them?
what do
Because
we do?
yeah, what do we
So
do?
in my VA clinics, where I took care of vets living on food stamps, living on disability income with, severe constraints financially, and severe constraints in terms of their energy. And I will also say severe constraints in terms of what they can access because they're living in rural Iowa.
Hmm.
We just get people to begin addressing, what they can. So I stress you got to take out the sugar. I want them to take out the gluten and the dairy and to ramp up the vegetables. People are eating frozen foods, canned foods, and that's fine. But over time, as we're teaching them how to cook, people typically begin to figure out how to improve the quality of their foods, and prioritize what foods you're going to get organically, begin growing some food, um, connect with their hunting friends,
Hmm.
and are having more wild game and venison.
Is it better to say go to like your local butcher, say for meat, right? To go to like a local butcher versus going to your brick and
Well,
mortar, your Safeways, Albertsons, things of that sort.
I think we all have to be mindful. People need to do what is realistic
Hmm.
given their environment. So if they can access a local butcher who can, butcher up venison, that's great. If there's not a local butcher in their area, I just want them to do the best they can given their economic reality.
No, that makes sense. And so, say for someone that's walking around, your Safeways and your Albertsons or what have you, what are some of the things to look out for? Because supermarkets are one of the heaviest marketed
So the
places.
we have a lot of very delicious, very cheap, inexpensive processed foods in the middle of the store. But if you go around the outside of the store and get the fresh produce or the frozen vegetables, that's where your best health is going to be.
No, I think I was on a call with a nutritionist and we kind of touched on this as well, and it was shop the perimeter.
Shop the perimeter, shop things that don't have USB, uh, you know, um, uh, barcodes on them. Instead, shop ingredients. And I do teach people
Mm-hmm.
how to use a pressure cooker and have gluten-free grains and legumes for a less expensive source of protein. We teach them how to cook. We teach them how to make soups and stews,
Oh wow.
and how to use less expensive cuts of meats.
Okay. No, I love that. I've always wanted to experiment with a pressure cooker. I've heard so many good things about it. I've just never gotten
You
to
know,
it.
and we have so many people who try to tell us that you can't implement the Wahls diet unless you're very wealthy and you can go to farmers markets, or pardon me, go to Whole Foods.
Uh-huh.
And my response is, for years I've taken people living on food stamps, on disability income, and we taught them how to implement these concepts, living within their budgets, and they could experience health transformation. We did have to teach them how to cook, and they had to start cooking at home.
Yeah.
And so we'd talk about how to cook given your time constraints that you might have and given your financial constraints you might have.
No, that makes perfect sense. I think there was a study done where it wasn't so much the types of food, like if you want to eat a hamburger you can eat a hamburger, but it's don't go get a pre-made hamburger and a frozen hamburger or something from McDonald's and fast food. Like, make the hamburger at home yourself and it'll
Um,
taste better, because I guess it's because you're
yes.
really monitoring the amount of salt and everything that's going into it, so it'll be a healthier option, so it's
Yes, you,
not so
you want
much
you want to cook at home. It'll save you a lot of money, a lot of time,
and a lot of health.
a lot of health. Absolutely.
And so, really kind of bring it back to your field of expertise. So what would you say, some advice for someone that's dealing, because there's so many different autoimmunes, right? Say someone that's doing the conventional method of
Well,
treatment for like lupus. What would you kind of say to
so
them?
people with a serious autoimmune condition, they're terrified of becoming disabled due to their serious autoimmune condition. They're terrified of their treating specialist who's telling them to take these very potent drugs and you go through the package list and lists cancers, serious life-threatening infections, liver disease, kidney damage, heart damage. So you're terrified of the drugs, but you're more terrified of becoming profoundly disabled.
Hmm.
And what I want to reassure them is there is so much they can do if you begin to address diet quality and these environmental factors that will improve your quality of life, reduce your pain, improve your energy. And very often, allow you to take much less toxic, less serious drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And very often, uh, you have such success, you're able to get off many of these harmful drugs.
So what are some of the first like if there was like these are the first five things that you should do,
Well,
like obviously the diet, and is it like cut the grains out, cut the dairy out?
the first thing I want people to do is think deeply about what is their mission? What do they want their health for?
Mm-hmm.
Because they have to grow their internal resolve to do this stuff. Because when we change our diet and lifestyle, it's work. You're
Yep.
giving up foods that are familiar, that are tasty, that are everywhere, and you're going to acquire, and you begin to eat foods whose tastes are not familiar. In that first couple of weeks, will feel uncomfortable. So understanding why you want to do this will help grow your resolve to do it. Understanding that these inflammatory foods can worsen your inflammation molecules and make your biochemistry work in a much more destructive way. So you want to know why you're doing this. You want to have a little understanding that food can really influence your biochemistry.
Mm-hmm.
And then we remove the most inflammatory foods, the most destructive foods. And so ask people to give up sugar, to give up gluten grains, so that's wheat and many ancient grains, and the dairy proteins, because those foods can really rev up the destructive biochemical molecules in your body. And then I ask people to really increase the vegetables, particularly the cabbage, onion, mushroom family, the green leafy vegetables,
Mm-hmm.
in deeply pigmented things like beets, carrots, berries.
So it's really upping your vitamin K intake.
Absolutely.
Okay. And what is the importance of vitamin K? Because we always hear about vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin B.
Well,
Vitamin K isn't one of the more popular ones.
uh, the research is growing with vitamin K, and we're beginning to be able to measure our vitamin K levels in the blood.
Mm-hmm.
We eat the vitamin K, the bacteria in our bowels convert it to vitamin K2 MK7. We absorb that in the small intestine. It goes to the liver, and the liver, does some further metabolism modifications to that molecule. We now know that these more active forms of vitamin K are really important for stem cells, to
Mm-hmm.
keep your stem cells young in your bone marrow and throughout your body. Very important for stem cells in your brain. And if you want to keep your brain healthy, you want to have good, healthy brain stem cells. So it's a potent anti-aging. It's very potent for helping your brain make the cells that will make and repair the myelin. And that's part of what's been damaged with aging and with multiple sclerosis. And vitamin K turns out to be really important for getting calcium into our skeleton and into our teeth.
Wow, that's very informative to say the least. And so outside of, we've spent some time talking about diet, which is obviously a big passion for you. But what are some steps that somebody can take outside of the diet? Because I know that, I mean, that's
Yeah,
the diet is just one part of it. And so
that is
what are
certainly
what are the other
so.
things?
Yeah, again, I think one of the most important things to do is understand why you want to go on this healing journey. What is it that you want your health for? And so I ask people to identify. So in my case, as I was getting more and more disabled, I spent a lot of time thinking about my children, and that I wanted my children to grow up economically successful and emotionally successful.
Mm-hmm.
And I was having to reimagine how I was going to teach them those skills as a more and more disabled person. Um, I talked to my folks, what is their mission in life? And then I asked them to make a physical goal, what they would like to be doing. And so it might be uh, uh, raising a garden again. It might be helping with the school plays. It might be leading Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts. And so we have that inner work, then invite them to make a simple next physical step that they could take.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be as simple as, okay, I'll walk outside to the mailbox every day. And then when they can do that, then we ask, okay, what's the next physical step that you could take? So having them work towards goals that matter to them are really helpful, and having them visualize what it is that they would like their health for. It makes it possible that they can grow their internal motivation to do this work. Because when you're asking people to give up food that they love, that's cheap, it's everywhere, that tastes really good,
Yeah, it's hard.
to which they're probably addicted, is tough.
Yep.
And we're going to ask them to be uncomfortable and to begin eating foods that they don't know how to prepare, who have a taste they're not familiar with. That's also tough. And so you have to create inspiration. You have to have them understand at least a little bit how the mechanisms of food impacts this stuff. And then we work out simple goals that they can begin.
Okay. And so how important was it for you, if you can give examples, great. If not, I mean, it's totally understandable, but just to make sure that because you're taking inventory of your body during this process, then you're taking inventory of, the types of activities you're doing. And can you kind of touch on the importance of taking inventory of the environment and the association that you put in place?
Well,
I think that's the third leg to the.
So when I've got people fired up, imagining a healthier life and some clear goals, and we have taught them why they should remove gluten and dairy and ramp up the vegetables. And then we acknowledge that these yummy foods that are bad for us, if they're in our eating environment, they will find their way into my mouth. It's just going to happen, folks. And so you want to get them out of your eating environment. So my advice is, okay, so the foods that you're going to exclude, because they're harmful to you, you need to get them out of your environment. Now, you either give them to your friends, your family, or your enemies, according to what feels like the right thing to do. But you want to get it out of your house, out of your eating environment, so that you're no longer tempted to accidentally eat these foods that are harmful to you. And then work on adding in foods that are good for you, familiar foods that you enjoy, and then you can gradually experiment with some new foods that are in that recommended category.
Okay. And so what are you, for lack of a better word, prescribing as, a go-to treat for somebody that wants to start living a healthier lifestyle and is starting to think long-term, be like, hey, I want to be here for my kids, grandkids, and so on and so forth. My
grandchildren.
Yeah.
So, sugar is really very harmful. It fertilizes the wrong microbes in our gut. So I want sugar out. I want people to eat vegetables. And if you're looking for a sweet treat, I want them to have just fruit. Have some berries, have an orange, have some cherries. And the other thing is that I'm really down on sweet sugar substitutes. Those I think we're much better served by stopping the sugar addiction and having limited amounts of fruit as your treat, and eat. Our grandmothers were right. We should be eating our vegetables.
It's kind of one of those where you look back on it and it's like, dang it, I hate it when they're right.
Grandma and great-grandma were so wise. And I'm like, man, you guys were so incredibly wise.
Yeah, it's, shucks. I was somewhere, it was spring break, and then I was on a trip with my kids and my mom. And it was when something came up, my kids were talking about, it was about food. And I made and I was like, yeah, so all the stuff that, Nana, which is my mom, I was like, all the stuff Nana used to tell me, I used to think she didn't know what she was talking about. And now that I'm older, everything she said was right. And it pisses me off. And she just stood there like laughing, like, yeah, stupid.
Yeah, as we get older, we finally can appreciate the wisdom of our
Yeah.
parents and our
You know,
grandparents.
life has a funny way of kind of letting you learn what you need to learn when you need to learn it.
Well, yeah, I can think of for myself, my body had been crying out for years, probably decades,
Hmm.
of symptoms and difficulty that I wasn't prepared to hear. And I had to have profound disability, profound levels of pain before I started hearing
So
and
what were
understanding and
some of
taking
the
actions.
what were some of those things? Because some people it might be happening and they just might not even realize it's happening. Like for
So,
me,
declining energy, more fatigue. Then I started having problems with concentration. I had for years episodes of trigeminal neuralgia, and that's electrical face pain that would come on, sort of like a jolt of electricity. They would come more frequently. And I'd be bothered for a few days, then it was for a few weeks, then it was for a few months. Um, I was taking higher and higher doses of gabapentin. Then I was taking gabapentin every day. Then I was going frequently to the pain clinic. Then they started sending me for high dose IV immune suppressant, salumedrol. And so, when this turns on, light triggers a pain, sound triggers a pain, swallowing triggers a pain. So I'd get to the point where I couldn't talk, couldn't swallow. I couldn't, if there's any light touch, any sound anywhere, it would cause this involuntary jolt of pain. I would have an involuntary grimace. I couldn't talk, I couldn't walk. Then I get taken to the pain clinic. This was very, very difficult.
and so I'll be obviously before your aha moment, were you kind of what was going on mentally? Because now you're just in like almost just a negative process and recurrence of events of just kind of dealing, because it's kind of just like I just want to survive
Well,
and maintain
you're
versus
you're
trying to like progress
so
and get out of the hole.
I spent a lot of time thinking about my kids. My At that point, my son was in high school, and my daughter's in junior high. And I know they're watching me, and I just have to keep doing the best that I can, going to work. Life's not fair. Um, and though it might be very difficult, you couldn't just give up. Um, and I realized I was going to have to teach resilience with the only tool that I had, which was still carrying on life.
Hmm.
Fortunately, I could still work, although that was getting increasingly difficult. Um, and then, I'm blessed. I was able to finally begin to realize that there were things I could control, and that changing my diet, uh, taking more care of my stress-reducing activity, continuing to work with my physical therapist on my exercise activity, began to have this remarkable transformation.
No, that's a great. Um, I do want to be respectful of your time. I know we're coming close here, and so can you share with everybody where they can get information on
Sure.
on what you're on your teachings and your
Yeah.
practice and
So you could go to my website, Terry Wahls, Terry, Walls, WAHLS.com. If you do /diet, we have a lovely one-page handout that summarizes the diet that we use in our clinics and my clinical trials to really help people get started. We have a variety of helping tools to help people in their healing journey. And then in the summer, we have a seminar where I teach patients, their families, and we teach health professionals how to adopt these concepts in their lives or in their clinical practice, to really help people make further progress in their healing journeys.
No, I love that. And then, are you also directing people to your social networks?
Oh yeah,
I know you're on
yeah.
Instagram as well, so it's Dr. Terry
So
Wahls on Instagram.
correct. So Facebook and Twitter are at Terry Wahls.
Uh-huh.
That's one word. My Instagram is at Dr. Terry Wahls. So that's Dr. Terry Terry Wahls Wahls. And the Instagram's really wonderful. You get to see what I'm eating, what I'm doing. It's a lovely inspiration to get lots of info. The Facebook has commentary on some of the latest research. And then if you're on my email list, again, we'll have more articles and more commentary blogs about, concrete steps that you can begin to take as part of your healing journey.
No, I love it. I know your practice is really specific with autoimmune and things of that sort, but I just think not almost anybody and everybody will just gain so much value out of this, because I think
Yeah.
it's so easy for us to fall into the pitfalls of just eating what is normal and tastes good, and not realizing the damage that it's actually doing in the grand scheme of things. And so I am so appreciative of your time, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to share this with your tribe.
No, thank you so much, and I will be sure to reach out to you once it's published and ready to go. But you have a wonderful day, Dr. Terry Wahls. It was such an amazing blessing to have you on the call.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening today to this episode. I know you're having fun, because I'm having a ton of fun. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to tell your friends, because we got so much more, and I don't want anybody to miss it. Let's change lives. Share the podcast.